American society has went through a lot of changes lately, not the least of which are these Chinese balloons. At first, you hear about it on the radio, and your automatic assumption is some type of weather balloon, harmless. But as we take a look at things a little closer, we start to realize a conversation that I once had with an Army Ranger during the wars in the Middle East. He was dropped off in North Korea, and I assume it's because of North Korea's ability to become the switch for the Chinese to teach us about some of their communist values. We watched as Sony was attacked by Kim Jong-un to let us know how critical it is for us to have security when it comes to our information systems. And Snowden compounded the problem by letting us know how easily someone like North Korea, through Chinese persuasion, could cause us a lot of problems through the Pentagon. And so when you start to factor all these things in together and take Seth Rogen out with the movie that made humor a little bit out of it, we begin to understand some of the decision-making processes that come out of Washington. This decision was a tough one, I'm sure, because of things like the United Nations and trying to deal with someone who has such buying power as the Chinese. In the middle of trying to get through their NATO partner, Russia, with Putin and his oppressive treatment of the other states in the non-unified Soviet Union, I guess you would say. So security has to come to the forefront as far as our ability to address problems with things like weather balloons. Because we don't really understand what these weather balloons are. And we all know, especially in our Air Force here in the United States, we can do a lot of surveillance from places that you cannot see. So this arrogance of China to let these balloons go over the United States concerns me, because I have noticed things different in our communications. And I've addressed it in past posts on Rodney Rebel. And some of it sounds like me carrying on some, but these are major concerns, I think, for our country. One of which is, as we sit back and listen, the audio is changing with the newest, latest, and greatest audio systems on the TV. You can hear the separate conversations of the fans in the crowds at the basketball games. And easily that can be manipulated by something called subliminary perception, which was addressed in the 70s through Coca-Cola's efforts to manipulate people using their subconscious mind by creating little triggers. And what those triggers are, I refer to a lot of times as tones, bells, and whistles. When we go out into society, we can hear certain things that will cause us alarm. Like, for instance, a car alarm. What's the first thing that we do? Check to see if it's ours. Just by a simple sound. There's tones inside of retail establishments letting you know things like, that the cooler alarm is going off because there's something wrong. And they institute actions in us that are programmed on a daily basis. We don't even realize that we're listening for these sounds to let us know if everything's okay or if we need to be alarmed. More or less, some of the more intense subliminary perception where you might be watching something and they'll say something hideous and you can't quit hearing it because it's covered up just enough to aggravate you because you can't hear who's saying it or where they're saying it at. But someone could be saying something about your child, something like that. And those are techniques that are used not only by the Chinese military, but by the American military as well, which was well documented in the UN's address of war criminals treatment as far as torture is concerned in places like Guantanamo Bay. So if we're capable of doing these things, imagine some of the communist value systems which has a much less emphasis on human rights and what they may be able to do through J-Core Communications, Turner Communications, or some of the Rupert Murdoch programming that's out there, if we're not paying attention. And it is my belief that there are a lot of these subliminary issues out there that are starting to pile up because people aren't paying attention. If you go back to my friend in Tennessee, who I'm sure has heard of my family, the Donaldsons, and his wife, Tipper Gore, they tried to address some of the issues that we face today under the Clinton presidency. Tipper Gore was very active in monitoring what our children are watching and listening to. And as a child, of course, you're against what she's saying about the PMRC. But as we get older and start to look at the effects it has on children, I start to question some of the games out there, especially the ones that are popular for their violence. And the way that our children are using these headsets now to play games like Grand Theft Auto and some of the other ones, where they are listening to other children freely while they are playing games that are circled around becoming a drug dealer, killing police officers, participating in prostitution, and stealing cars to have a positive outcome. These are things that we need to really take a look at, especially when you hear some of the conversation that come out of our adolescents' mouths today. Now, I'm not saying that we need to become the overseer of their every move, but definitely those type of games need to be taken off the shelves. Not even adults need to play games with those type of themes. It's not popular, but I would be a person who would appreciate leadership that would make these decisions, even though they're not popular. The children will get over it. The parents may be misunderstood as to what their children are doing on these video games with these cheat sheets that can actually cause some of these games to become pornographic as well. If you listen to some of the conversations on the games, they're very misogynistic when it comes to women and some of the language that they use to address our future mothers and daughters out there and define their identities to our young ladies as they listen to these terrible, terrible depictions of women. As we move forward from the weather balloons, some of the surveillance and some of the manipulation that may go on out there with Wi-Fi and with different networks and communications, such as the Atlanta Ted Turner Communications conglomerate, J-Core Communications here locally with 700 WLW. I have also brought up issues that came from Butler Warren Road, where my grandmother lived, near Western Row, and how that when we were young, my cousins and I would go to our grandmother's house, and the power from the Stars and Stripes radio station, which is a military radio station that they used on 700, to reach troops in Japan When they had it at their peak times, which was 12 to 3, it would actually open garage doors on Western Row and Butler Moore, and you could hear it play with no electric, no speakers, or no anything. It would come through the metal piping. Where the ducts are for your furnace, it would actually play Yankee Doodle Dandy through the metal. And there was some damage caused. I'm sure there was insurance claims. You could talk to people like my grandmother or her neighbor Gwen or the people at the Church of Christ there in Mason, Ohio, to find out that I'm telling you the truth. Of course, my grandmother is dead. I'm saying people of that generation that live there. So you can imagine how dangerous something could become in the hands of Russians, North Koreans, and Chinese if they were able to start to target their audiences while we're not listening or we're at work, and then cranking up something as powerful as J-Core, Stars, and Stripes was back in the day. It's not popular to have conflict or to address situations like these weather balloons. But I think it is very, very important for us to look at the whole spectrum of issues that these breaches on our FCC guidelines and our FCC airways protections are. We cannot simply sit back and pretend that we're not hearing things. We can't sit back and act like that when we're watching our television, that we don't notice the changes in the attire, or that they're telling our daughters that it's okay to be under 100 pounds at 6 foot tall, and they're starting to show these females depicted in ways that are not natural as far as their physiques and such go. And there have been some strives to make it a more normal event to see women on TV and not to set these standards that were kind of emphasized by Donald J. Trump in some of our Miss America, Miss USA pageants, where these girls think that that's the goal that they have in life and begin to become bulimic, begin to not have self-esteem, begin to seek attention because of the depiction of the importance of this, cliche female that you may see on magazine covers and televisions. We want to, as government, we want to watch and monitor how the psychological effects of things like that can be on our young ladies in the world and our young men in the world, and start to try to address things on individual bases, especially in the areas of school shootings. We notice that there's a rash of them, and some of it comes from them seeing some of the school shootings like Columbine and others on TV and getting the idea from there. But the real problem with our children, in my opinion, is trying to fit into all the compartments that are created in a society that bases itself on such simple values as color, race, creed, and sexual orientation. So, as a nation, we need to learn to accept and to stop emphasizing so much on differences. If a person is different than you are, then thank God for it, because you have a lot to learn from them, because they are not you, which makes you a greater person, because you can integrate all the positive qualities of these people that are different from you into your characteristics and the way that you carry yourself. And then the things that you don't like about them that you think are appalling, you can simply remove yourself from them. If you're not getting out of the relationship more than you want to, and you're starting to feel like you're slighted in the relationship, putting up with their judgments, simply walk away. It's called liberty. It's a great way to live your life.